The big question at COP28, which is only 8 days away, is whether the world is on track to tackle the climate crisis. What does this mean for the global south? The first global stocktake will be concluded at COP28. And the global stocktake is a report on how the global community is doing on the goals set in 2015 in Paris. The Paris Agreement set ambitious targets, including sustainably reducing greenhouse gas emissions and providing finance to developing countries. These and many more. The big question at COP28, which is only 8 days away, is whether the world is on track to tackle the climate crisis. So today we'll hear from our expert panel on 3 main topics that will be big conversations at the upcoming COP. The first of these is unpacking the loss and damage fund, implications for women and girls in the global south. Then we'll also hear about elevating sustainable agriculture to the forefront of climate action. And lastly, we'll hear our experts' views on empowering businesses in driving the circular economy, looking at some of the key strategies and considerations. And to start us off, I would like to introduce Dr. Rachel Masika, who will speak to us about unpacking the loss and damage fund, implications for women and girls in the global south. Dr. Rachel Masika is a gender and global development consultant specializing in climate change, digital technologies, and urbanization. She boasts a wealth of experience as a former academic researcher and educator with a particular focus on the critical intersection of gender and climate change. She has held senior research fellow positions at the University of Brighton and lectured in distinguished institutions including Burbank College, UCL, the Institute of Development Studies, and Sussex University. Dr. Masika is passionate about shaping global development in a sustainable and gender-inclusive manner. Welcome, Dr. Rachel Masika.
Thank you, Eve, for such a good introduction. I'll just share my screen. Right, good afternoon from my end, and good morning or good evening, wherever you are, if you're in a different time zone. As Eve said, I'm a gender and global development consultant, and I've been working on gender issues for many years as an academic, researcher, policy analyst, consultant, and also in program contexts. I'm delighted to be here today to discuss and share and explore the gender dimensions of the Loss and Damage Fund. Loss and damage is a hot topic at the moment. So I'm going to suggest a few ways of how we might consider gender in the negotiations and the deliberations around the Loss and Damage Fund. Like with other areas in climate finance, it's widely acknowledged that the climate finance has largely ignored gender issues. And that's not very different with the Loss and Damage Fund. So let's start with what it is. It's an aspect of climate finance, and as we know that climate finance is very crucial. Is a very crucial challenge for us in transitioning towards a climate resilient future. Unless we get climate funds or resources, we cannot and we will not be able to get the action that we need for reducing greenhouse gases. Loss and damage is a general term used in UN climate negotiations to refer to consequences of climate change. Consequences such as loss of coastal heritage due to rising sea levels, loss of homes, loss of livelihoods, extreme floods, heat waves, desertification, species extinction, and crop failures, and so many other things as well in consideration. Typically, the Loss and Damage Fund refers to financial assistance to vulnerable countries, largely which are in the global south. It relates to the financial mechanisms and initiatives aimed at addressing the adverse impact of climate change. Estimates vary about what this sum or figure is that we're looking at, but one estimates it as much as $525 billion since the year 2000. Not so many countries have enlisted support, but as in 2022, the early pledges included Denmark, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Ireland, New Zealand, and Canada. There's still quite a lot of debate about what loss and damage is and what it should cover. Put simply, the loss and damage debate is about the harm caused by climate change and how it should be paid for. It hinges on the notion of distributive justice, which is a facet of climate justice, which emphasizes that recipient countries' vulnerability should be an important consideration in funding allocation. The key questions that are being debated are: who is responsible for providing funding? How should funding be allocated and based on what criteria? What should the funding be used for? It also hinges upon how decisions regarding the raising, allocating, and use of climate finance are to be made and by whom. It is argued by it's argued that developed countries who have historically benefited from a high carbon economy and have contributed disproportionately to climate change have an obligation, referred to sometimes as a climate debt, in helping developing countries finance adaptation. The African continent, for example, contributes the least to climate change harm, and yet is one of the most vulnerable to its impacts. Generally, the quality and quantity of finance remains inadequate for covering climate loss, damage, mitigation, adaptation, and overlap. At the COP27, a transitional committee was set up to establish an organizational and funding model for loss and damage. It's most likely that the World Bank will administer this fund, which has caused quite a bit of disquiet in some of the Global South countries, who have argued that the World Bank is too slow, inefficient, unaccountable, and lacks organizational culture to tackle climate change. And also because of issues around conditionality, previous engagements with the World Bank, and its how it's engaged with the Global South. In itself, the Transitional Committee or the Loss and Damage Fund acknowledged that gender equality is and women's empowerment is a core principle, and there's also representation on the committee by women. What is the key issue, and why should we really be looking at gender in terms of the Loss and Damage Fund? The key thing about why we should is that women and girls face gender-intensified challenges. We know that women have additional challenges related to climate change harm because of their position in society. Climate change often has differential impacts on women and men due to their roles and responsibilities. Women in the Global South are often disproportionately affected by climate-related events, such as natural disasters, as they tend to have limited access to resources, less decision-making power, and may be responsible for caregiving and food provision. They also have greater vulnerability, which is a threat multiplier, because climate change hazards increase existing gender inequalities. Gender norms and discrimination deny women income, legal rights, and access to resources. Norms assign them the primary role for caring for families and providing for their livelihoods. There's a burden on them for traveling further to collect food or firewood when they're, desertification. Also, norms make it more difficult for women to migrate and seek refuge when disasters hit. It's also more difficult for women and girls to bounce back from climate hazards or climate harm. So, for example, women in the Global South do not have easy access to funds to cover climate challenges. And yet, women contribute to mitigation and adaptation, and yet are often overlooked. They contribute to climate change responses in different ways. For example, they're engaged in strategies to cope with and adapt to climate change by switching to drought-resistant seeds, using low-impact or organic soil management techniques, or leading community reforestation. Without a gender lens, climate financing instruments delivering loss and damage funding can potentially exacerbate women's tendencies towards discrimination. We know that women's livelihoods tend to be climate sensitive. If we take, for example, that women in Africa account for 80% of food production, but don't own land, have difficulty getting credit, agriculture extension, and excluded from formal processes of around adaptation. So we would hope that this will not be the case in relation to loss and damage funding. Going forward, there are some traps for the loss and damage fund. There's the issue about the investment readiness of global South countries. So, for example, they might not have the mechanisms in place to tap into global finance. Sometimes, particularly for poor people, it can be very difficult to get the collateral, to get loans, for instance, if it's in the form of loans. Another challenge or trap for the loss and damage fund is that women might be overlooked in financing mechanisms. The danger with this is that if you look at current global financial mechanisms around climate financing, for example, if we look at the majority, women account, for example, for 43% of agricultural labor in the global South. And yet in 2019, only 2% of groups, which are largely small-scale farmers, where women are highly represented, actually were able to tap into climate finance. We also know that submissions on climate finance to the OECD and UNFC are often not gender disaggregated. So we don't know exactly how the finance is being distributed in terms of benefiting men and women. There is an opportunity for the Loss and Damage Fund to actually leverage gender equality by prioritizing initiatives and mechanisms that benefit the most vulnerable, including women. There are many opportunities for advocacy and mechanisms for accountability, but because of time, I'll just mention a few. Loss and damage funds need to be designed and operationalized in ways that they reach women and girls, as climate harm has a much differential impact on them, and they're disproportionately affected by climate change. One of the ways of doing this is by ensuring that concessionary public funding is passed on to women as beneficiaries. Another way is gender-responsive funding guidelines, allocation criteria, and financial instruments. Another way of engaging again with women and gender is engaging with representation and participation, ensuring that the representation of women in decision-making processes related to loss and damage funding. Women's interests need to be included in the design, implementation, and the governance of initiatives to help ensure that their perspectives, needs, and priorities are considered. We also need to consider gender-responsive actions and responses. One example would be, because we know that women tend to have challenges gaining collateral, so rather than loans in terms of initiatives, there might be consideration given to grants for women in certain situations. There's also the need for capacity building and skills development for women, in programs within the parameters of the Loss and Damage Fund. These should aim to empower women and enhance their ability to adapt to climate change, manage risks, and engage in climate resilient livelihoods. There's also some scope or need to engage in building gender capacity building, to improve gender integration in planning processes and documentations, and to also make it more participatory. For example, special support to the meaningful input and participation of women as key stakeholders in fund-related country coordinating mechanisms that determine country-level funding priorities. And also to engage women throughout the funding cycles of programs or projects, from design to implementation, monitoring, evaluation, including a very particular and very special focus on participatory monitoring approaches. There's also need to focus on data and research. Adequate data collection and research on gender disaggregated impacts of climate change and loss and damage is important because this data can inform policies, strategies, and actions to address gender-specific vulnerabilities. Tracking gender responsive finance is also important. It's a key component to measuring measuring impact and equity. The UN Women, for example, asserts that tracking investments in gender equality and women's empowerment is one of the most effective ways to assess accountability for gender equality. For that, we need explicit criteria in performance objectives and results measurement frameworks, and in the evaluation of funding options. Mandatory gender analysis of proposed projects would be helpful and go a long way, including, fully costed program-specific gender action plans, gender budgets, with unclear quantitative and qualitative indicators, measuring how projects or programs or initiatives more generally contribute to gender equality objectives, and the systematic collection of gender disaggregated data. Gender tagging of data of budgets as well is quite important. And finally, leadership and allyship by people such as yourselves who are in positions of influence, who can contribute to shaping the Loss and Damage Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rachel Masika, for those highlights. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard what the Loss and Damage Fund is about and why it's important, particularly for the women and girls in the Global South. And Dr. Masika ably talked about the imperatives for the fund and how the fund should seek to address the gaps that currently exist for women on climate change issues. We invite you to send in your questions. They'll be answered at the end of the webinar. We're now moving on to our next topic, which is on elevating sustainable agriculture to the forefront of climate action. And for this, we have our expert, Michael Murigi, who is a distinguished impact evaluation expert and economist with over 12 years of experience in developing, translating, and executing impact measurement and learning strategies in agricultural value chains, climate change adaptation and mitigation, clean energy, youth and women empowerment, financial inclusion, education, and training. Michael has worked extensively across Africa. He boasts several awards. Notably, he was honored with the Queen's Young Leaders Award by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for his outstanding work in championing climate-smart rural initiatives that promote the adoption of improved cassava varieties in Kenya. He's currently undertaking his doctorate degree in economics. Welcome, Michael Murigi.
Okay, thank you, Eve. Hope I can be heard and my slides can be seen.
Yes.
Okay, as Eve has rightly said, I'm an ecological economist, a monitoring and evaluation expert, and also a sustainable development practitioner. And I'll be speaking to us about aspects of sustainable agriculture and sustainable food systems that are relevant for the upcoming COP. And regarding how we can leverage the COP28 to catalyze a transformative shift towards sustainability, say that when we talk about food systems, we are not just referring to agriculture and food production, but also distribution, marketing, and consumption systems. And first, we can leverage on COP28 to elevate the food systems agenda globally, and this would by raising global awareness in food systems and the opportunities available in sustainable food systems. And that would call for prioritization of this discussion, and especially on the interconnected challenges of climate change, food security, and biodiversity. And side events, conversations at the COP. And it will be important to integrate all the food systems considerations in all relevant negotiations at the COP. We all know that at the COP, we expect a variety of stakeholders from research institutions, governments, private sector, civil society. And these could foster a collaboration, innovation, and knowledge transfer, because we know that there is quite some information asymmetry. There are some countries that are doing better in terms of food systems transformation than others. For example, some countries in the north, such as Denmark, are now talking of adopting precision agriculture practices. We know that Africa is the last continent to experience or has not yet experienced an agrarian revolution. So there is a lot that Africa could learn from counterparts in Latin America, Asia, and also, especially in the current age, where we are talking of the South-South cooperation. There is a lot that can be learned in terms of knowledge exchanges and capacity building efforts. Then we know that financial resources are quite important for this transformation. We cannot achieve sustainable food systems without adequate financial resources. And we are expecting that there will be commitments from governments, the private sector, philanthropic organizations, and to invest in sustainable food systems initiatives globally. Then some of the priority policy options for sustainable agriculture that could be looked into, considered at the COP. I'll just mention a few, there are many. First would be to empower smallholder farmers and rural populations. We know that smallholder farmers, and these are farmers that manage farms less than 2 hectares of land. They are very, very important in terms of food production. They actually contribute to 80% of food production globally. And that proportion could even be higher in the global South countries. But in their farming activities, they encounter several challenges, including access to land. There needs to be reforms in the large tenure security systems. They have challenges to do with access to credit. Usually, in most countries, they are locked out of the conventional financial systems. They're actually touted to be uncreditworthy. So there needs to be reforms in the financial sector to see how they can be integrated and they benefit from the financial systems. And they are also often locked out of decision-making processes. Right now, we are talking of the indigenous and local knowledge systems. It is important to hear from them, learning from their experiences in food systems and how that can be leveraged in the transformation. Then they also face challenges to do with market access, which of course limit the incomes they get from their farming activities, and which endanger their or limit their livelihoods. We could try to look at how industry agriculture initiatives like contract farming could be embraced and adopted so that farmers can benefit from their sweat. Then we talk of agriculture research and development. We know that agriculture is one of the sectors that is now being affected heavily by climate change, and there is need to develop and continue the development of climate resilient crops, livestock varieties, and also crop management techniques. And of course, that requires a lot of efforts in terms of research and innovation. Then we know that in the post-Washington consensus, which came with the implementation of the sustainable or structural adjustment programs, the agricultural extension and advisory services in most countries in global South were greatly weakened. So these need to be strengthened because they play a critical role in terms of accessing or farmers accessing the latest knowledge and farming technologies. so as to enhance the agricultural productivity. Then we are now talking of climate resilient infrastructure. We need to invest in irrigation systems so that we can get our farmers out of rain-fed agriculture. Then we now talk of post-harvest losses. Actually, in most countries in the global south, and to an extent of 40% of the agricultural produce goes to waste. So there needs to be improvement in terms of storage facilities to stem this critical challenge of post-harvest losses, and also early warning systems. Currently, a number of countries around the globe are experiencing El Nino and the La Nina phenomena. How are our farmers informed, and how have they been prepared to deal with these effects? Then, as I said at the beginning, sustainable food systems are not just about production, distribution, also consumption. We know that food waste is a critical challenge, but there are countries in the global north, such as Sweden, that have actually advanced in terms of food waste reduction programs and food waste recycling. So there's a lot that we can learn from them, and we need to learn from them so that we can stem food insecurity around the world. And also we need to diversify our foods from mainly livestock to more and more of the plant-based diets, so as to reduce carbon footprints from the food systems. Then in terms of global stock taking that Eve spoke about, which is all about assessment of progress towards the goals of the Paris Agreement, but now focused on sustainable agriculture and food systems. We need to know how far countries have come in terms of adopting these, what we are calling sustainable agricultural practices, such as agroecology, conservation agriculture, permaculture, and so on. And given that this is a monitoring and evaluation process, we need to know what frameworks and indicators are being used to assess and track progress. And what can we learn? What lessons can we learn from the challenges and the successes that have been achieved so far? Then in terms of role of sustainable agriculture and food systems in climate change mitigation and adaptation, we need to know actually what is the role of sustainable agriculture when it comes to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and how can we leverage on it to enhance resilience to climate change effects? What are the outcomes? What are contributions? And then in terms of impact of sustainable agriculture on food security and nutrition, we need to know what is the impact in different regions. Recently, I was reading a report that Africa is going to warm faster than other regions. And of course, this is going to have different effects in food security situation. Rachel earlier spoke of gendered impacts. We need to know how are men and women affected differently, especially when it comes to the question of food security and nutrition. What specific examples of success stories can we get from around the world, and how can we learn from these? Then in terms of policies and sustainable food systems, we need to know the kind of policies and support mechanism that different stakeholders are implementing, and how effective these measures can be or have been. Then in terms of the important question of financing for sustainable food systems, we need to know how financial resources are currently being mobilized to support these transformation to sustainable food systems. And what are some of the innovative financial mechanisms and partnerships that could be explored going into the future. And it's important actually to do this because we know that most countries in the global south are reeling from financial challenges as a result of the huge debt burden. There has been some crises brought by global geopolitical tensions. So, and these need to be supported to make sure that this transformation is not just equitable, but it's also fair and just. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was Michael Murigi taking us through the topic on elevating sustainable agriculture to the forefront of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, please send in your questions. We'll have an opportunity at the end of the presentations to answer any questions that you may have. You can go to the chat box and type in your questions there. We'll be able to pick them up and have our experts respond. I would now like to introduce our third speaker, and that to speak to us about empowering businesses in driving the circular economy, looking at key strategies and considerations. And to lead us in that conversation is Dr. Isabella Bonato, an environmental consultant specializing in urban solid waste and circular economy, with expertise in recycling, reverse logistics, socio-environmental projects, and waste research. She is a biologist with an MBA in environmental management, as well as a master's and a doctorate in environmental engineering. In her role as a consultant, Dr. Bonato is dedicated to devising strategies for managing urban solid waste and circular economy, including corporate sustainability and the packaging sector. She guides and supports companies in implementing sustainable practices and managing socio-environmental projects, encouraging the adoption of more conscious choices and the creation of businesses aligned with sustainable values and practices. The floor is yours, Dr. Bonato.
Hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Evie, for this introduction. So I'm here today. Today, I don't have the right answers sometimes, but I think that together we can have the right questions. And it's this that I want to deliver today. Try to show you different kinds of perspectives and strategies and considerations with the challenge inside this sector, the solid waste management and circular economy. So I would like to start this giving a context. So what is the relationship between solid waste management and climate change? So sometimes we talk about this and we are always talking about recycling and waste and the final destination. And of course that we know that solid waste contribute directly to the greenhouse gas emissions through CO2 and methane. And of course that they are very important inside this context of climate change. But when we are talking about waste, we are talking about materials. So we have to talk about all the life cycle of this material because waste produces greenhouse gas emissions during every stage of its life cycle. So if we want to address this problem, we need to talk about since extraction, manufacture, distribution, the supply chain, the use and life cycle, and the final destination. Another context that I would like to show here, it's about the outcomes from COP27. So it was a very important COP because it was the first one where we started to talk about solid waste management. And as an outcome, we have the 50 by 2050 strategy proposed by the Global Waste Initiative. And for these, in this strategy, we have ambitious waste reduction targets that it's 50% by the year 2050. And this is very ambitious, of course, but they are trying to achieve this, thinking about the possibilities inside of the technology and innovation, so advanced waste sorting and processing techniques, as well as the use of renewable energy sources, the emission mitigation through the solid waste management, so some effective methods to take this opportunity. The global collaboration and policy support, we are trying always to increase the international cooperation and the knowledge sharing. And so, of course, the result, the circular economy integration to minimize the resource extraction and energy consumption, and thereby reducing as well the carbon footprint associated with solid waste management, considering all the steps of the material. So also we have the global stock take and circular economy. And so we are expecting that they will discuss about the assessment of progress this year. And some topics are very related to the waste sector. As you can see, when we talk about circular economy, we are always talking about less raw material, less weight, fewer emissions. So we have some very specific topics, for example, a scale up renewable and reduce fossil fuel, so change to our energy systems. Here we have a lot of opportunities since we have new technologies of energy from waste. Also reduce emissions across the industry and the transport, because logistics is very important inside this sector. Preserve forests and address non-CO2 emissions. Yes, for example, if we consider the paper, if we are recycling this, we will be able to preserve more forests. To support local communities in developing regions, this is very important because inside the waste sector, we have a lot of community-based organizations. Promote transparent adaptation reports. This is very important for the transparency of the progress of this, and capacity building programs. And so when we see these topics and thinking about this assessment of progress, the global stock take and the adaptation and sustainable the solid waste business strategies with the circular economy, we are talking as well about sustainable supply chain management. So this is very important. All the sectors today, they have concerns about this. For example, the extraction sector, the logistics, packaging, very important for the waste, the textile, food sector, technology, social environmental sector, energy sector, SGS agendas and the Sustainable Development Goals, and international regulations that we are talking about, and this is increasing. So it's about value proposition. We have different products, we have different partnerships and possibilities, and we have different consumers. So we have to think about all the actors of this supply chain management, and so we will have a lot of possibilities to work with waste. For example, if we consider the logistics, we have different clients, different industries, and all of them will use new technologies, new softwares to improve their programs, their I mean, all the sector, they need improvements. So the technologies, they are here and we need to enjoy of this. So we can deliver better solutions to the world. Also, very important, the social sector, it's not about only environmental when we talk about waste. We are talking as well about social sector, informal sector, and gender agenda. That, as Rachel said as well, it's very important. And in solid waste management, we have most of the workers are women. So we have a space for this kind of opportunity as well. And so the question is how to enhance the private sector accountability within this framework. And first of all, just remembering the waste hierarchy, we need always to think about the opportunities that will prevent the waste. If it's not possible to prevent, to reduce, so reuse, recycle, recover, and the final destination. So the final destination is always the last option when nothing more is possible. And with this, if we follow these opportunities, we can reduce emissions from energy consumption because less energy is needed to extract and process new raw materials. We will increase the storage of carbon in trees, considering that we can keep the trees and we can use the old papers. We can reduce emissions from incinerators and landfills once the less waste will go to this kind of final destination. And to achieve this, it's always important to say about transparency and reporting. So when you work with this and you work with sustainability and circularity metrics, you have to show how you measure it, how you have to be able to measure it. So it's a way to encouraging business to disclose the efforts as well, and to promote this culture of responsibility within the private sector. This is very important to the next topic about collaboration and partnerships. To collaborate with something, you have to know what is happening. So you will not help someone or some companies that you don't know what is happening. So it's very important this knowledge sharing, the development of this best practice, and the implementation of innovative solutions that can drive this circular agenda forward. We have some discussions going on, and it's about more in the incentive to sustainable practices. So, for example, rewards for business that prioritize circular economy principles in their operations. And we can say as well, the tax incentives, the grants, or the preference in government procurement. So they are trying to discuss about it. Another very strong one is product design for circularity. So prioritizing product design that facilitates the reuse, repair, and recycling. So some strategies inside the design that minimize the use of virgin materials and will promote this use of recycled materials. The extended producer responsibility, the famous EPR. So I hope that they will discuss a lot about this topic. It's very important. Sometimes we need policies that hold this responsibility for the entire life cycle of the product, including the final disposal. The resource efficiency and the waste reduction, so implementing technologies and process that maximize the use of these resources. Again, we are talking about the products and the materials, not only about the final destination. And yes, we have these discussions going on, but we need more. We always need more for all the sectors. I'm closing this session, but as you can see, we need scaling up financing, capacity building, and technology for all the sectors. And in this way, we can achieve the 15 by 2050 strategy goal, and also we can empower business in driving the circular economy. So, for example, we are expecting to have more ideas and strategies inside the facilitation of the implementation, considering the sustainable waste management practices, to explore more about the financing mechanism, for example, partnerships between cities, public-private partnerships to support the development and deployment of the advanced waste management technologies. Also, training and expertise to empower businesses to adopt and implement sustainable waste management solutions. Capitalizing on cutting-edge technologies like smart waste management system and advanced recycling technologies. These can significantly enhance the efficiency of waste management process. And that's how we are expecting this kind of event can deliver something and some answers and some strategies about all of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Isabella Bonato. You've very well articulated what is at stake at COP28, looking at the circular economy and waste management. And thank you to our three presenters. I would now like to take this opportunity to open it up for a few more minutes, giving our presenters 2 minutes each to wrap up on any final thoughts on the respective topics, on unpacking the loss and damage fund, responding to any questions that may have come through, elevating sustainable agriculture, and empowering businesses. So we'll start again with Dr. Rachel Masika.
Thank you. There are no questions, so I'll just reiterate a few things. Again, I'd like to reiterate the point that the loss and damage fund provides a valuable opportunity for integrating or addressing gender inequality. Unfortunately, we know that with most climate finance, climate financing, gender is often very absent. But we must be mindful that there are opportunities. So for those who have positions of influence, who are attending some of these, the COP28 conference, it's an opportunity for trying to inject gender issues. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rachel Masika. Michael Murigi?
Yes, thank you, Eve. I would also want to emphasize on the urgency of the need to transform our food systems. That is, it's in the global south and especially in Africa. And that is very important because it will aid us to reduce our exposure, vulnerabilities to the impacts of climate change. And not just that, but also the global geopolitical tensions and crises such as COVID. We know that most of our countries here in Africa, we are food imports. And when all these crises and tensions happen, we are exposed to food insecurity. And there is no country that can develop with hunger as an important impediment. Thank you.
So much, Michael Murigi, indeed, for reminding us about the urgency of being mindful about food sustainability, particularly in the global south. Over to you, Isabella, for any final thoughts?
So thank you very much for this opportunity. I think that it's very important to say that some years ago, we are used to talk about solid waste management, and the circular economy, it's a new concept, but it's very necessary because we cannot talk only about how we manage our waste. We have to prevent it. So it's also a different mindset. We have to change all the system, and that's why we need the circular economy. And and I'm happy that it's coming for the next COP, because we need the new systems, as Michael said. We cannot work and leave the things how they are now. We really need new systems. And I think that this is the importance of the circular economy and the sustainable supply chain, thinking about materials. And yes, I hope that COP28 delivers something about all the topics that I have discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella, well put. And indeed, we hope that COP28 will deliver for our countries, for the communities in the front line, for women and young girls at every stage who are affected most by climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this webinar series is essentially to educate ourselves about some of these pertinent issues, the negotiations that take place on the global stage, and also to bring diverse voices around the table in order to influence policy making at all levels. At country level, we know our countries are committed to delivering on climate action at country levels, but also on the global stage, driving and pushing for the global community to achieve the commitments. And so besides the webinar series at Multitrack, we provide expert guidance and tailored solutions to government agencies, development organizations, and businesses to align with climate goals and sustainability initiatives. Our team of experienced consultants will support you with assessing risks, developing strategies, identifying opportunities, and building capacities for positive environmental impact and sustainability measurements. We do invite you to check out our website to where you can get more detailed information about our solutions and our services, consulting services. And indeed, please feel free to send us an email to inquire for any tailor-made services. We hope this webinar was useful, valuable to you. And for those who will be participating at COP28 this year, do represent as well. Thank you, and we look forward to having you again at the next webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you. One last thing. I just saw a question here from Ian. How can county government help in waste management? And I think that the first thing for all the problems that we have discussed here, it's to put first in the government agenda, because sometimes we don't even have this thing. And if we have this kind of discussion, like in a COP28, for example, maybe the government now, we are expecting that they will think about it. They will start to think about it. So they have the first thing to have this goal. Otherwise, we cannot do anything as a person. But yes, and also as a normal person, I think that we can push them and talk about it. And if we have a president that is talking about climate change, we need to ask him about this, about all our main concerns. And so it's and when one starts, all the other ones will start again as well, because they have to follow up all the actions. So I think that this is how I see the importance of this kind of discussion.
Thank you indeed. Well put. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That wraps up our conversation today, and we look forward to more conversations on more topical issues. Have a good day wherever you may be tuning in from. Bye-bye.